Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses. I'm Kevin Williams of Survival Skills Rider Training. Hope you can hear me all right this morning. My microphone, I'm not sure if it's actually picking up from the headset or not. Yeah, I got the video the wrong way round. After hours of planning, careful planning, I still managed to get the video the wrong way round. Anyway, so what have we got for you in today's show? We have plenty of stories after a couple of weeks with nothing much happening. The 2022 accident statistics have come out. Motorcycle fatalities are up, but so were vehicle miles. So expect some shock horror reports in the press. Another shock horror report is that the EU seems to be recommending lower speed limits for motorcycles, but that's not actually the case, as I'll explain exactly how the processes are working. I've said many times smart motorways aren't a great place to break down, but they're a bad place to break down on a motorcycle, as something I spotted whilst out during the week will show. The Prime team, that's the Scottish road markings, they grabbed 2 safety awards. Talk about that. I'll also have a look at a quite important MotoCAP video, actually, short video and an article. About disappointing results on abrasion testing and seam strength and burst strength for ladies' leggings particularly. But I'll also suggest that how you could use some an underlayer legging to actually revive older riding kit. And Royal Enfield have unveiled their new Himalayan. And finally, I'll come back to 20 limits as well, and I'll just sort of look at the history of 20 limits. Probably they go back rather longer than you'd realised. Right, so Paul's looked in, Aaron's looked in, and he says he can hear me fine, so that's good news. Right, okay, so settle yourselves down for the next 30 minutes or so. Don't forget, if you have anything to say, I'm very happy to hear it, and if you've got comment, question, anything you want to ask, I will try to get back to you during the show if I possibly can, afterwards if I can't do it live. Right, so on with the show. Well, before we get into the news proper, let's just talk about very briefly about the weather, because it's taken a bit of a dive, as you probably noticed, from one extreme to the other. One day it was lovely and warm, and the next day it was surprisingly cold. It's a lovely sunny day here in London at the moment, but the temperatures have plummeted, as they have across most of the country, and temperatures dropped to -4 in the north of the UK last night. So do watch out if you are out and about in the north, particularly at higher elevations, for lingering icy patches, and you could even find scattered snow showers up in Scotland. Now, for the first half of the week, frosts are likely to continue. Looks like the cold plunge is going to spread further south, so if you've got any tender plants, it might be a good time to wrap them up. And watch out too, if you're commuting, there could well be fog patches in the mornings, as it will continue calm and colder than normal for mid-October. Now, temperatures will be on the rise again later in the week, but there's a forecast for heavy rain, so keep an eye again on the forecasts. Right, okay, so what else we got to talk about then? Well, figures out this month revealed that 2022 wasn't a great year for motorcycle fatalities. There are actually 350 involving powered two-wheelers in 2022, and that's up 40 on 2021's total. Now, overall, there were 1,711 fatalities on the roads in Great Britain in 2022, according to the Department of Transport's reports, which is just out. Numbers, of course, exclude Northern Ireland. So the bad news is that roughly 1 in 5 fatalities involves a motorcyclist, which is a scary figure indeed. Now, whilst the numbers are up by 40 rather, which is roughly 10%, isn't it, over the previous year, 2021, before we all leap to the obvious conclusion that motorcycling has got more dangerous, which will undoubtedly happen in the press, let's just have a look at the the numbers for miles travelled. And of course, what you can see is that 2021, 2020, there were significant dips, of course, because of COVID. So we still had travel restrictions happening quite late into 2021. So it significantly affected the amount of travel on the roads. And although it's hard to see because the motorcycle line is right at the very bottom of the graph, what you can see is that overall road traffic increased by 8.8% in 2022 over 2021. And I did drill down through the figures, and I can tell you that powered two-wheeler use increased from 2.5 billion vehicle miles in 2021 to 2.8 billion vehicle miles in 2022, which just happens to be up by around 10%, which is basically a figure that closely matches the percentage increase in rider fatalities. So it's always worth checking the stats properly before you anybody knee-jerk reflexes to a headline figure. Hello, Kevin. Nice to see you too, and I hope you enjoy the show later. Right, so what else have we got for you today? Oh, that wasn't the one I wanted, was it? It's amazing. I get everything carefully arranged, and it all still goes wrong. So if you were to believe a slew of articles that have been appearing in the motorcycle press right now, you might well be forgiven for believing that the European Parliament are proposing to make motorcycles follow lower speed limits than other vehicles on the roads, with differing speed limits actually applying to the A1, A2 and A licence classes. And as you progress up through the licences to the more powerful classes, then you'd be allowed to ride faster, not more advanced licences, as one online report has already incorrectly described it. Now, where does this actually come from? Well, it's actually a proposal by a rapporteur to the European Parliament, Karima Delli of the Greens Europe Free Alliance. Now, she's also suggested that there should be a points-based licence system, lessons on road safety and alternative forms of mobility in the secondary school curricula. There should be a removal of the ability of member states to lower the minimum age for certain licence categories. That's presumably looking at mopeds and the light four-wheeled car things that they use in certain countries. Raising the minimum age for the A1 driving licence. A new category B plus for cars weighing over 1.8 tonnes for drivers over 21 after a 2-year probationary period on a category B licence, although again, that's questionable because you can get plenty of performance cars which are under the 1.8 tonne license weight. A 10-year limit on licences. A licence limit of 2 years for novice drivers to be renewed via a refresher course. Changes to the licences for drivers aged 60 or over to ensure they are fully fit to drive, and compulsory medical examinations for anyone taking a driving test or renewing a driving licence. So quite a lot of fairly radical proposals there. Now, the concept of stepped speed limits for motorcycles to go with the stepped license system we have already has been greeted, probably rightly, by riders' organisations such as FEMA, who say, also probably correctly, that the vast majority of other road users will have no idea why a motorcyclist is travelling below the posted speed limit. The average road user, bikers included, I have to be honest here, struggle enough already to understand that different limits apply very often to HGVs and coaches, for example. Now, although I can't find the original document, FEMA quote it but without giving a link, the rationale for the stepped speed limits seems to be based on a faulty idea that speed limits should, quote, vary according to the category of driving licence held by drivers, a factor that reflects their vehicle's likelihood to be involved in an accident. Now, as far as I know, motorcyclists are not involved in significantly more crashes than other road users. The real issue here is the very disproportionate risk from crashing and the level of injury that follows a crash. So rather than telling everybody it's a bonkers idea, this is the kind of detail that the riders' rights organisations should be tackling and looking at to try to get some kind of grip on these kind of proposals. But before we think this is anything, even vaguely approaching a done deal, the rapporteur is merely putting forward a proposals to be debated in committee. Then the committee has to prepare something that goes before the Parliament, and long before the EU Parliament will rubber stamp a proposal like this. It's worth pointing out that the Green Alliance only holds around 10% of the total number of seats in the European Parliament. So suggesting this is a legislation that is about to hit everybody in the EU is going way beyond the point. Now, coming back from the Kent coast, as we were during the week, we were on the M20. We were travelling towards the junction with the M26, which is where all the M25 traffic heads off towards the Channel ports if they come south around London. That was on Thursday afternoon, and we passed a queue of near stationary traffic that was building rapidly from the opposite direction. Now, I measured it at between 2 and 3 miles at the point where we passed the end of it. Now, why was it being held up? Well, at the head of it were 2 highways cars with their flashing lights on, and they were straddling the 4 lanes and moving at a very slow walking pace. So what were they actually protecting? Well, it was some poor bugger pushing what looked like a very big Harley along the inside lane. Now, since this is a smart motorway, of course, there is no hard shoulder. So I assume that what had probably happened is something like this. The rider had broken down. He'd had to come to a halt in the 1 metre space between the Armco barrier and the inside of the near side running lane. He'd probably been spotted either on CCTV or maybe by a passerby who'd phoned the emergency services to tell them that the rider had broken down. Now, hopefully the rider got over the barrier and out the way. But whatever, I'd guess the 2 4x4s had been scrambled to bring the traffic to a stop so that the machine could be recovered from a refuge. Now, of course, he had to get it to there first. I had no idea how far he'd pushed it already ahead of the rolling roadblock or how far he had to go to the next emergency refuge. But the poor bloke looked pretty done in. Some people, I've already put this up online, and there have been some suggestions. One was, why didn't they just close the inside lane and let the traffic continue to pass? Well, my guess is probably the issue that some drivers will ignore the red X, and possibly they wouldn't spot the obstruction of a motorcycle stranded on the very edge of the lane very easily. So my guess is that they probably decided to close all the lanes to get the motorcycle out of the way. But the other question, of course, is why didn't they send a recovery vehicle to get it? Well, I have no idea what the only available. Maybe it's as simple as that, and they decided the safest thing to do was get the bike pushed up the road into the refuge where it's reasonably well out of the way. But whatever. I think my beliefs about the smart motorways from this show and my written comments. I'm certainly not a fan of breaking down where there's no safe place to get off the road. And I speak from the experience of having had a car written off when I had to stop on a dual carriageway and somebody hit it within 30 seconds. I barely got out the vehicle. Right, so what have we got else to talk about? Well, that's not the right picture. Why have I got these all out of order? That's the one I wanted. This is the Scottish Prime project, which I have been featuring. And the idea is that those signs there, prime, literally, motorcyclists to negotiate left-hand bends ahead more safely. The idea is that they funnel the rider onto a line which keeps them away from the white line down the middle of the road, and that helps avoid crossover collisions with oncoming vehicles. Now, these are in Scotland, and the developer of this idea has just been honoured with 2 awards at the Institute of Highway Engineers annual awards ceremony for 2023. So Dr. Alex Steadman, who was a speaker on one of the conferences I talked at, actually. He's the man behind the project. He announced his team had won the award for Road Safety Scheme of the Year, but they'd also been awarded the Best of the Best Judges Special Merit Award. So a great result there. Now, Dr. Stedman said that over the 3 years of the trials in Scotland, he had manually counted and processed video footage of over 32,000 motorcycles. So that's a fair old task there. Now, his analysis of the results says that it demonstrates that the prime road markings do actually promote a positive behaviour change in motorcyclists. So this is using what's known as nudge psychology. And ultimately, the aim, of course, is to let motorcyclists enjoy the roads, but at the same time use them with some additional information which helps keep them safer while we're using them. So reducing casualties, basically, at the same time as enhancing their enjoyment. He said teams now working on phase 2, which is basically investigating further research questions and developing an installation manual so that other road safety stakeholders around the world can begin to install their own prime road markings without having to go through all the rigmarole of proving that it actually works. So congratulations to Dr. Alex and his team there. Now, you'll probably know that another organisation that I follow closely and have been promoting the work of is MotoCAP. You probably know that I met Associate Professor Chris Hurren whilst we were both working as presenters on the Shiny Side Up events in New Zealand in 2018. Since then, I've met him several times, and I've got to visit his testing lab at Deakin University in Geelong earlier this year, back in March, actually. Now, one thing that Chris actually made pretty clear on our first meeting, largely because my other half was wearing them, was his unhappiness with stretchy ladies' leggings and jeggings. Now, the specific problem is that they are manufactured from knitted fabric, usually. And the trouble with knitted fabrics is that they unravel very quickly once the threads start to tear. Now, woven cloth, like a denim fabric, for example, is much, much tougher. But he now has the evidence to prove it. Now, recent MotoCAP testing on women's motorcycle protective leggings and jeggings has, quote, discovered unalarmingly poor performance, with 7 of 10 brands scoring only half a star for protection. Now, these are all tested on the MotoCAP's Cambridge abrasion machine, which means that all the results are repeatable and they can all be cross-referenced with other garments too. And the bad news is that many of these ladies' leggings managed less than half a second before they failed on this abrasion tester. So basically that's as close to an instant failure as you can get, and that's going to expose flesh to the road surface long before you stop sliding. He also found that seam and tear strength was very poor, and some of the kit lacked armour too. Now, Chris said in an interview with Bike Social that the buttocks and the side of the leg are at high risk of abrasion and or seam failure in a crash. Now, MotoCAP themselves recommend 2 stars for urban riding kit, and only the Moto Girl Sherry and the Resurgence Sarah Jane trousers actually achieved that mark. So that's pretty poor results there. Now, Chris has recently been over here in the UK. He's been testing our own road surfaces with his portable abrasion tester, which allows him to cross-reference road surface, genuine real-life road surfaces, with the testing machine that he has back in his laboratory. So the standard, to actually ensure that the standards are realistic. Now, some UK manufacturers, I believe, have claimed that our roads aren't as abrasive as those in Australia and New Zealand. But I met up with Chris while he was over here to chat about his work here, and I discovered that he'd already found one of the roads, which had been selected pretty much at random for the tests, had been pretty super abrasive, rather like some of the roads in New Zealand. Now, Deakin University has released a short information video. It's called Style or Safety. Deakin research reveals low protection of women's motorcycle gear. You can find it here. There's the video link just going up now. If you want to know more about Chris and how he operates, then I did actually interview Chris back in April 2020 and put an hour-long special up on my YouTube channel. So do pop over there and catch up with this one. As I say, it's 3 years old now, but everything in it is still just as relevant as it was then. And I see that Paul has actually posted a post there. There we go. Brief summary of 10 models of leggings tested by MotoCAP with their respective star ratings. So there we go. You can see all that there. Thank you very much indeed for that, Paul. Right, so anything else I was going to say? Yes, just if you want to learn more about MotoCAP generally, find out what it is that they do, if you haven't come across them before, and to look at all their garment tests, have a look here. And that's their website. Go over there, have a look, and there's plenty over there to read. Now, if you already have bike kit, of course, are you going to replace it? Well, you may feel that it's necessary to do so, but the problem is, of course, that you're going to be spending lots of money doing it. So there is an option, and again, I've lost the ruddy photo. I can't find it. Don't know what I've done with it. All right, okay, too bad. And this is the Botex Elite armored leggings. Now, I'll just put that up in the comments as I was going to show you the video, or at least the photograph of it. I can't actually find the photo now. So have a look at that, their website. They do AA, they do AAA armored leggings. Now, they're not cheap. The AAA ones are £239, I believe. But have a look at their store and see what they have to offer. There is actually a long review on the Bennett's Bike Social website, which is doing some sterling work, I have to say, on promoting better quality motorcycle clothing. So pop over to Bennett's and have a look at what they have to offer there. So basically what they would allow you to do is wear a comfortable item of clothing which isn't actually up to scratch in terms of protection, and you just basically put the underlayer underneath it and that gives you all the protection that you need. As I say, there is a AAA armored legging available from this company. Right, so that was what I wanted to show. So if you enjoy the show, do find a moment to pop over to my website and have a look at the work I'm doing over there. Oh, can't find the Royal Enfield photo now either, which was my next story. Oh yes, there it is. All right, they're all out of order for some reason. I have no idea why. Right, so yeah, do pop over, subscribe to my YouTube channel, hit the like button, set yourself up with a bell for the alerts if you want to. Wednesdays and Sundays they go out almost always live at 11, occasionally recorded, occasionally, very rarely they go out at a different time, and even more rarely I cancel a show. So that's where you can set yourself a reminder. Right, okay, so now motorcycles. I've got a picture of a motorcycle here. Let me see if I can get that up on screen. Ooh, there it is. Thank the Lord for that. At least I got that working this morning. Now, it's hardly a secret, since Royal Enfield have been carefully leaking plenty of news and what I usually termed unofficial spy shots of their bikes, but I always suspect that they're probably carefully set up, of their forthcoming Himalayan model, which Malcolm tells me isn't pronounced Himalayan at all in some parts of India, but hey ho, let's stick with the English pronunciation. So anyway, the manufacturer has now formally released photos of the new machine. It's called the Royal Enfield Himalayan 452, which moves on from the original Himalayan 411, which launched back in 2016. Now the photos reveal that the bike, let's just get it full screen for you, zoom in a little bit. if I can. There we go. Now the front end of it, it has a beak, it has a sort of a raised mudguard, it has an LED headlight, and behind that there is a small screen, and you get an LED, presumably display, which is sort of just behind the screen. And got sort of humpy looking fuel tank. I don't think that's a dent. I think that is actually a styling feature. You can see it's got a protector around the front of it anyway. You've got a split twin seat, which is quite tidy, isn't it, with a little rack behind it. The radiator itself is placed fairly high up there in under the tank, sort of well out the way, hopefully well protected by the long mudguard as well. And you'll see that the motor has a bash plate around it and around the downpipe, although there are no engine protector bars. Now the exhaust system also looks a lot more modern than the previous version, although you'll notice there is a sort of a fairly ugly looking little section which is presumably the catalyzer just behind the rider's foot peg, so let's hope that doesn't get too hot. The wheels themselves are fairly conventional. They're off-road 17-inch rear, 21-inch front. They're both spokes, but I was looking at one picture of these, and these spokes appear to be on the center line. I noticed another picture, the spokes appeared to be on the rim. Now, which is which, whether they're going to come with these spoke wheels, which presumably imply tubed tyres, or whether they're going to come with the spokes laced to the outside of the rim, which presumably implies tubeless tyre, I don't yet know. The tyres appear to be CEAT, which I believe is Indian brand. Whether the European models will get something more upmarket, I don't know. But something which has not been mentioned in any of the reports I can see is the new frame. Now, look at that. It's got a monoshock there. And if you look at the front, you've also got upside down front suspension. Overall, bike's said to be 3 kilograms lighter than the outgoing model at 196 kilograms. It's also slightly wider, slightly longer, but the motor is the interesting bit, really. I guess it's a major step up from the old lump. Powers up from 25 horsepower to 40 at 8,000 rpm, so it's quite revvy. Delivering peak torque 40 to 45 newton meters, one report says, via a 6-speed gearbox. I always think 6 speeds are usually fairly redundant on a single, but anyway, hey-ho. I can't say I'm too keen on the battleship grey colour of that particular bike, but if you look behind it, you'll see that there was a yellow and black one in the background, and that looks vaguely reminiscent of the old TDR 250 Yamaha, actually, I thought, but probably nothing like the performance of that bike. Price wise, Himalayan, good question. It's expected to be on a par with the KTM 390 Adventure and the BMW G310 GS. It's expected to launch in India in around 1 month's time, so coinciding with the sort of bike shows this autumn. When it'll arrive in the UK, I don't know. But the one question that crossed my mind is how long do you think it will take Triumph to develop their own 400cc single into a mini adventure bike? Coming next year, do you think? I wouldn't be at all surprised. Right, okay, so a couple of comments. Martin says the Deacon informational video is very good. Personally, I buy gently used second-hand unused kit. Can get great kit for pennies. Yes, absolutely. 2-piece leather suit for £40. That's not bad going, is it? And Terry says excellent, as is some of the helmet tests now included on MotoCAP are now quite dated. Some model helmets have changed in key areas such as helmet retention systems. Yeah, okay. I mean, that's always a problem with any study like this. The Sharp ratings we have in the UK, some of those now refer to helmets which haven't been on the market for quite a few years. Well, ideally, I suppose they ought to be filtered out. But hey ho, that's another question, and not for today. Right, okay, so on to the final part of today's show. Now, last week I looked at a fairly questionable response from the IAM Road Smart's Director of Policy and Standards, Nicholas Lyes, in which he was critical of the introduction of the 20-mile-per-hour urban speed limit in Wales. So if you want to go back and have a look at last week's Sunday's show, you'll find out what I said then. But I thought it'd be interesting to have actually a bit of a look at the history of 20 limits today and to go into their background a little bit deeper. Now, 20 limits in their modern form have actually been around in the UK for over 30 years. The very first trial of a 20 limit was actually in 1992. Now, the wider rollout commenced around 2000. So we have a 20-year history of 20 limits, and we're still arguing about them, which is, fairly remarkable, really. But actually, the 20 limits goes back even further than that, because if you probably won't remember this, because you'd need a very, very long memory indeed, but the UK actually had a 20 mile per hour blanket speed limit set by the 1903 Motor Car Act. But this was actually repealed for light vehicles in 1930, which led to the situation where there was no speed limit at all. Now, the result, not surprisingly, was that there was a sudden surge of accidents and crashes and deaths related to motor vehicles. So it wasn't very surprising that things got changed very quickly. Now, back in 1934, there were less than 1/10 of the number of cars there are on the roads today. I'm surprised it was that many, actually. But death toll was more than 4 times higher. So not too surprisingly, there was an outcry. Government reacted, and in 1935, the 30 mile per hour speed limit that we know today was brought in for built-up areas. So our 30 limit is almost 100 years old. Now, the thing is, despite there being a sort of debate about this in Parliament and the 30 limit being brought in response to these high casualty levels, there was no science behind the choice of 30 as a limit. It was simply an arbitrary limit, although presumably it was felt to be sensible enough at the time. Now, equally predictably, of course, the new 30 limit wasn't popular back in 1935, and the BBC, when they had an article about this, they said that signs were often torn down. So, of course, 90 odd years later, 30 seems a norm. Now it's any deviation from 30 mile per hour speed limits that's greeted with controversy. And whilst the motoring organisations, the RAC and the AA, like the IAM, have expressed support for 20 mile per hour limits outside schools, they too oppose a blanket change from 30 to 20. Now, as I said, the 30 limit was arbitrary. It was just plucked out of thin air. Unlike the 30 limit, the 20 limit, or the 50 kph limit, which is the near equivalent in Europe, the 30 kph limit, which is the European equivalent, they're based on overwhelming evidence that lowering speeds reduces the severity of collisions and resultant injuries, particularly when pedestrians and other vulnerable road users, who include motorcyclists, of course, are involved. Now, Duncan made a good point last week when he said that, quote, the meta-analysis shows that pedestrian fatalities are inversely correlated with traffic speed and directly correlated with traffic density. So basically what he's saying there is the more vehicles you have on the roads, the more collisions there are likely to be. I agree with that analysis. It does seem to be correct, having looked at the data. However, it doesn't mean that a collision with a car travelling at 30 miles per hour, if it hits a pedestrian or a cyclist or a motorcyclist, of course, come to that, isn't much more likely to kill the victim than the same collision which happens at the lower speed of 20 miles per hour. But there are a couple of other factors too. First of all, you'll probably know, hopefully you do, that stopping distance quadruples as speed doubles. So the reverse is true. Even reducing the speed from 30 to 20, that's a 50% reduction, has a much more significant effect on stopping distances than is immediately obvious to most people. And that means that many potential collisions can be avoided by actually hitting the brakes and stopping in that much shorter distance. So the lower speed reduces the chances of an impact. If it does come to an impact, there's less energy involved, much less energy involved, and that's why the risk of being killed in a collision between a car and a pedestrian at 50 kph, which is 31 miles per hour, is 5 times higher than the same collision if the car happens to be traveling at 30 kph or 18.6 miles per hour. So how much of a reduction, though, in the likelihood of a collision actually is there? Well, Transport Research Laboratory, they've done studies on this, and they suggest that there is an average of a 6% reduction in collisions for each 1 mile per hour reduction in average speed. And that's why last week I was talking about the importance of driving down the average speed by using 20 zones over 30 zones. Most drivers will exceed the speed limit a little bit. There, I showed you a graph last time that showed you how the speed is actually clustered around the speed limit. So if you do drop the speed limit, it's not the absolute compliance that matters, it is that reduction in average speed, which leads to benefits in terms of the numbers of collisions and the impacts that result. Now, there's also another objection here. There's a common belief that there's no causal relationship between speed limits and deaths. For example, the Association of British Drivers claims that reductions that have been achieved are the result of, quote, road engineering, better cars and better brakes, not speed limits. But the fact is that before and after studies that are done over relatively short periods clearly show that the positive reduction is due to the reduced speed. It's too quick to have occurred due to the sort of better cars, better brakes thing. You can argue that over 30, 40 years, absolutely. But to try to suggest that it's the result, that it's what's happening if a lower speed limit goes from 30 to 20 is bonkers. Now, for example, in 2021, in the Journal of Transport and Health, they looked at the citywide implementation of the 20 limit in Edinburgh and a city centre scheme in Belfast. Now, they found that, quote, reductions in speed resulted in significant reductions in collisions and casualties, particularly in Edinburgh, which had higher average speeds at their baseline. So the intervention basically worked. And as I said last week, it's not all about absolute compliance with these limits. It's driving the average speeds down. And this was also noted, a 2018 study that concluded success is not defined by all average speeds being under the set speed limit at 20 miles per hour. It's about bringing vehicle speeds down closer to 20 and assessing any positive impacts of that speed reduction compared with the situation before the introduction of the lower limit. So there we go. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that a 20 limit means that vulnerable road users are safe. Whilst it's often the case that, of course, that drivers, any motorised vehicle, it's that hierarchy of harm, isn't it? They get the blame for collisions with vulnerable road users. And one article quoted a study by the Netherlands Institute for Road Safety Research, SWOV, as saying that in around 80% of incidents in 20 limits, the road infrastructure played a significant part. Now, I'm not quite sure what that means since I can't find the original article. Maybe the traffic calming measures, which often go with a 20 limit, weren't up to scratch. I don't know. But I did note that in their 2020 fact sheet, Infrastructure for Pedestrians and Cyclists, SWOV did claim that shared space design, where the conventional design elements that separate pedestrians and drivers, such as curbs and pavements, are eliminated, have so far not been scientifically proven to reduce casualties. So shared space schemes were a big hit 10 years or so ago. They were starting to be put in multiple places. There's a shared space scheme in Exhibition Road. I was there the other day, and I noticed that it's been subtly changed to make it slightly more obvious that the traffic is being segregated from the pedestrianised area. So shared space was going to be a big hit with riders and or drivers and cyclists and pedestrians, it seems not to have worked as planned. Right, okay, so next week I will come back to this again, and I'll have a look at how it may be that some political decisions are being taken over 20 limits, which are actually misusing them. So that'll be my final look on this topic. Right, okay. Paul, coming back to the older data, yeah, good point. Paul says the older reports provide consumers with a record of garments consistency across the passage of time, already evidence in decline in performance from some brands. Yeah, okay, fair point. And Kevin concludes by saying some may say the only way to negate risks from vehicles is for a vehicle not to move at all. Well, yes, indeed. Arguably should be more education that speed restrictions are limits, not targets. I wouldn't entirely disagree with that. There are safe speeds, or I should not say safe speeds at all, should I? There are speeds which are more appropriate to certain situations than others, I would guess is the right answer. However, educating people to stick to limits is not the easiest thing in the world. Right, okay, that is it for today, pretty much. So before I finish off, though, hopefully I did get this bit all sorted out. I just want to say thank you to this week's supporters. We have Claire, Living Martial Arts, Johan, Mad Cockney, and Anonymous, who have been over to my coffee page and made a contribution over there. So thank you to all of those. And don't forget, if you do want to get your name in lights, the place to go is Coffee, and where you will find that the hundreds and hundreds of articles which I've been putting up over the last few months. We have now reached the point where everything is completed right down to 2022, and 2023 is in progress. So that's getting on for 1,000 articles over there if you want to pop over and support me. Right, so thank you very much indeed for looking in. I will be back with another show on it's on Sunday. And hopefully the weather will have warmed up a bit by then from today, and we will still be able to enjoy a bit of biking. Right, thanks ever so much. Don't forget, if you've got any comments, anything to say, do drop me a line. Always happy to see them. And if you are out there today on your motorcycle, and it is a lovely morning at the moment down here in London, do stay shiny side up.